Everyone. So today we are starting on chapter 10. It's over Oceania and Australia, Oceania being the islands out in the Pacific. So today you're going to do 10.1 and 10.2 because you're out of school tomorrow. And then on Monday, you'll do 10.3 and 10.4 notes. And then you'll do your review on Tuesday and take your test on Wednesday. So we're going to go ahead and get started here with our notes. So we're looking today at the islands of Oceania, looking at the different types of islands there, looking at how some of them were discovered, different ways that they may have been colonized, how different people came to be there. So the largest island in Oceania is called New Guinea. Let me bring my book over here closer so I can look at it. And half of it is claimed by Indonesia. So there are two types of islands in the Pacific. There's high islands and low islands. The high islands are the Pacific islands of volcanic origin whose height enables agriculture to grow and humans to reside on them, meaning that there's volcanoes under the ocean. When it erupted, it created this island, and it would have different heights on it. It would have mountains sometimes that would create rain and create a good fertile soil for agriculture, for plants to be able to grow and different things. And with that, humans are able to live there. Then the high islands, like I said, tend to be better for people and agriculture. The high altitude of volcanic mountains allows the islands to capture moisture from the warm ocean breezes. When explorers were sailing around the Pacific, they were much more likely to find supplies on high islands. So they would look for these islands. Then you have the low islands. These are specific coral islands that have little fresh water and few places where humans can live. Unlike the high islands, they are not created from volcanoes. They are created off of coral reefs. So there's no elevation. So there's no warm breeze like on the high islands. So it's flat. The picture here is a kind of an example of what a low island would look like. Low islands tend to be drier and have less rainfall. People living on these islands are more dependent on fishing as a food supply. The low islands also tend to suffer greater damage from tropical storms and high waves. All right, another way of defining the Pacific Islands is by their geographic groups. You have Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. Melanesia is named after the dark-skinned people who live in the region. It includes Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and Fuji. Micronesia meaning small islands, is north of Melanesia and east of the Philippines. Most of Micronesia is more than 2,000 islands are small and low. Some are less than 1 square mile in size. Polynesia, meaning many islands, lies within the Great Triangle formed by the Hawaiian Islands, Easter Island, and New Zealand. So if you look here at this map, this is where Oceania is. So when we refer to Oceania, this is what we're referring to. These are the islands that make up the Pacific. So you have Polynesia, you can see New Zealand, Hawaiian Islands, Easter Island, that makes a triangle, Melanesia, and then Micronesia. Micronesia would be the one on top, Melanesia would be the one on the bottom. Some scientists have theorized that the islands of the Pacific were first colonized from the west. They believe that the Indonesians and Asians first made their way to New Guinea and then island hopped across the Pacific. Scientists who supported this theory offer at least 3 observations about these islands. There were archaeological records of New Guinea shows earlier civilizations than the other Pacific islands. So that shows that New Guinea was discovered first, and then islands began to island hop from there. The languages of the island people are similar to Indonesian and Asian languages. And many of the plants and animals on the islands are found in Indonesia and Asia. At first, Europeans and others doubted that the islanders could navigate miles of open water. Then scholars found evidence of islanders trading with far-off islands. These modern islanders were able to cross as much as 500 miles of an open ocean. This evidence forced the scientists to agree with the Pacific Islander, to agree that the Pacific Islanders could have traveled as far as Easter Island, which is near South America, a distance of 2,000 miles. All right, offering a different theory, Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl proposed that the first Polynesians came from South America rather than Asia. And to kind of prove this theory, he built a boat from balsa logs and other materials found in Peru. The expedition was called the Kon-Tiki expedition, and he launched it in 1947, and he proved that it was possible to travel in a balsa boat from Peru to the island of Tuamotu in the Pacific. While many scientists rejected Heyerdahl's claims, he demonstrated that his theory was a possible answer to the question of where the original inhabitants of these Pacific islands came from. Of the many islands claimed by European countries, only a few were heavily colonized. As in others' endeavors, colonization brought positive and negative consequences. Some of the negative consequences, as we've talked about before with the colonization of America, was the introduction of diseases. The natives there didn't have a immunity built up to these diseases, so it killed many people. One of the change that was kind of positive was the introduction of missionaries to the Pacific Island, such as John Paton, who was from Scotland. He ministered in the New Hebrides and on the Anawa Islands. Then you had James Chalmers, who was also a missionary to Papua New Guinea, that was killed by the natives. He was also from Scotland. So that is section 1. So now looking at section 2. Europeans believed a great land existed at the southern pole of the earth. They believed that without this great land there on the southern earth, that the earth would basically flip over. So they believed that there had to be a great land at the bottom of the earth. Map makers called the land the unknown southern land. They found their support for this idea in the writings of the early Greek astronomer Ptolemy, who proposed that there must be a land in the southern hemisphere equal in size or mass to Europe and Asia in order to keep the world from toppling over. So we're going to look at some of the people from different European countries who went out exploring, trying to find this great land at the south. First was Alvaro de Mendina. His first expedition left in 1567 and included 2 ships. On his expedition, he found the Solomon Islands, which he named after King Solomon of the Bible, since he was famous for his great riches. They were looking not only for this great land, but they were also looking for treasures. The Incans had told them about a mythical king who would went off with this treasure, maybe possibly to get them to just leave them alone, who knows? But the Spanish were looking for this treasure. So that was why he named it the Solomon Islands, after King Solomon and his great riches. So Medina's first expedition, he really didn't find much other than the Solomon Islands. So he wasn't discouraged by it, and he went off on another expedition in 1595, and he took along with him a navigator by the name of Pedro Fernandez de Porres. This time the expedition had 4 ships and carried settlers, including women and children. Medina ended up dying on this expedition. So Quiros took command of the ships when Medina died. Their expedition charted a course for the Solomon Islands, but miscalculated, and they came upon a new set of islands that they named the Marquesas, after the Viceroy of Peru. The islanders were friendly, and Medina invited them aboard. But when the islanders began to steal supplies, the Spanish crewmen shot and wounded several people. The Spaniards continued to deal brutally with the islanders, and they killed 200 people by the time the Spaniards resupplied the ship. Medina and Quiros continued to search for the Solomon Islands. However, the next island they found was not the intended goal. Medina tried to communicate with the island people without success. He decided to settle this island that he named Santa Cruz, meaning Holy Cross. Fever soon spread among the settlers, and many died, including Medina. So this is where Quiros took over. The Spanish could not continue to afford sponsoring these expeditions because they weren't bringing back the riches that were promised. So they cut off expeditions looking for this promised new land. Now looking at the Dutch exploration. The Dutch authorities in Batavia, the chief Dutch base of the East Indies, called one of their best captains, Abel Tasman, to search for the mythical unknown southern land. In 1642, Tasman took 2 ships and began his voyage. He started in southern India and sailed east. This way, Tasman thought he would not miss a large landmass that he believed to be the southern land. He sailed on, vainly looking for the unknown land. He sailed south of Australia and landed on the island now named for him, Tasmania. The Dutch sailors found signs of life on the island, but could not find the shy islanders. Tasman soon realized that this island was not the continent that he sought, so he sailed even further east. He crossed a large body of water, now called the Tasman Sea, and discovered another set of islands that we now call New Zealand. Tasman and his men made contact with the indigenous people there and discovered they were not friendly. The tall, fierce Maoris resisted Dutch attempts to land. As the Dutch sailors explored one of the bays, the Maru killed 4 sailors and drove the others back to the main ships. Tasman named this place Murderers Bay. On the second expedition in 1644, Tasman mapped out parts of the western coastline of Australia. Even though the west coastline looked uninviting, the Dutch knew that in such a sizable land, there might be better places for settlement. However, the Dutch lacked the manpower and the money to explore and colonize. To avoid drawing attention to the area, the Dutch East India Company suppressed many of Tasman's findings. They claimed the land they found and named it New Holland. Tasman retired in 1652, having failed to locate the mythical unknown southern land. However, he had discovered 3 new and important islands: Australia, Tasmania, and New Zealand. All right, so y'all will stop here today. Again, you're off tomorrow. Monday, you will pick up with 10.3 and 10.4. You'll review for your test on Tuesday and take your chapter 10 test on Wednesday. So y'all have a good long weekend, and we'll meet again next time. All right, so for here, we're going to pick up with 10.3. We're looking at the European exploration in the 1700s. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the English and the French stayed busy developing territory in the American colonies. However, when circumstances changed in their colonies in the 1700s, the French and the British renewed efforts to explore. Several French and British explorers sailed the Pacific during the 1700s, but only one man from each country will be examined. So we're going to look at one man from France and one man from England that explore these Pacific islands. For France, we're going to look at Louis Antoine de Bougainville. He claimed several islands for the French, including Tahiti. One important, excuse me, one important thing to note about him, he took along with him on his expedition a naturalist and an astronomer. The naturalist was brought along to describe and classify the animals and plants discovered. The astronomer was sought to work out new ways to determine longitude. And this kind of set a precedent for other captains to take along naturalists and astronomers with them on their explorations. All right, now the English, we're going to look at Captain James Cook. He was the most famous explorer in the Pacific, English explorer in the Pacific. He owes a small part of his success to sauerkraut. On long voyages, sailors often suffer from scurvy, a deadly disease caused by a lack of vitamin C in their diet. They didn't have a lot of fresh food, which is where you get your vitamin C from, vegetables and fruits. And they didn't have a lot of these fresh foods on a voyage out in a ship in the middle of the ocean. So they had this large vitamin C deficiency. Captain Cook convinced his officers to eat large amounts of sauerkraut, which is fermented cabbage, and set an example for the crew. His men learned to eat the sauerkraut to meet their vitamin C needs, and few ever came down with scurvy. So Cook discovered many islands in the Pacific, notably the Hawaiian Islands. He differed from explorers by treating the island peoples fairly and generously. Cook often noted in his diaries good characteristics and abilities that he observed in the islanders. One way that Captain Cook dealt with problems with the island people, however, led to his death. When islanders stole an island from the English ships or camps, Cook would capture a chief or other important person. Then he would announce that the captain would not be freed until the thief returned the stolen items. This method worked well until he tried it in Hawaii in 1779. After some Hawaiians stole tools in a canoe, Cook tried to take an old chief hostage. However, a mob of angry Hawaiians attacked Cook and his men. Cook's men escaped, but he did not. The furious Hawaiians beat Cook to death with their war clubs. All right, in our last section, we're going to look at European settlement in Australia. We may never know which European explorer was the first to see the coast of Australia. The Portuguese may have seen Cape York Peninsula, Cape York Peninsula, when they passed through the Torres Strait in 1606. The Dutch followed Australia's coastline many times as they explored the region in search of the mythical southern land. Captain Cook and his men landed in Botany Bay on August 23rd, 1770. And then surveyed the entire eastern coastline. All these countries viewed Australia as a land ready to be claimed and developed by Europeans. However, Australia already had a population. When Captain Cook landed in Botany Bay, he met a group of people who had no name for themselves. The Europeans called these people Aborigines. The word Aborigine comes from a Latin word that means origin or original. So we're going to look at some of the different things about the original Australians, these Aborigines. Some of the highlights of this, you had the didgeridoo, which was a musical instrument played by Australian Aborigines. Marn Grook was a game developed by the Aborigines that has elements of football and soccer. This is an example of some of the paintings that they did. We're going to look at the impact of European immigration. A lot of this just mimics what has already been done, like in the Americas. You had loss of land for these Aborigines. They were no longer able to have as much land as they did before. Exposure to diseases, same story. All right. England claims New South Wales. The Dutch had claimed an area called New Holland in northern Australia, but that did not mean the Dutch could claim all of Australia. Various European countries claimed land in Australia as they had in North America. Claims were based on a first come, first served basis. For example, when the Endeavour sailed into the harbor of Botany Bay, Captain Cook claimed the land he saw for England. He called this land New South Wales. When the American colonies declared their independence from England, the prison colony of Georgia was no longer available to Britain. The English decided to rid themselves of many of the occupants of the overflowing British prisons and poorhouses by relocating these people to the land Cook had claimed in Australia. The first fleet left England in May of 1787 and sailed to New South Wales. Of more than 1,000 people on these ships, over 800 were convicts. After traveling for about 8 months, the fleet's captain, Arthur Phillip, later the colony's first governor, sighted Australia. He had sailed ahead with the intentions of preparing a small settlement before the other ships arrived. However, the remaining ships arrived 2 days after he sailed into Botany Bay. Philip soon realized that this bay was too shallow and exposed to the open ocean to provide protection for the fleet. He found a more suitable port a few miles to the north, Port Jackson. This bay had a deep harbor and included many protected coves. Philip chose to settle in a cove that became known as Sydney Cove. This bay had a deep sand fringe harbor with a freshwater stream. The fleet arrived on January 26, 1788. This day is now celebrated as Australia Day. The future of the colony depended on building homes and cultivating land. However, there was no skilled laborers among the crew or convicts. In addition, the eucalyptus and other gum trees that were abundant in supply were very hard and quickly ruined the axes. When the settlers were finally able to cut down one of these trees, it took up to 12 men a full day to dig out the stump. In order to survive, the settlers resorted to building houses from cabbage trees covered with wattle and dab, which sticks in mud plaster. Another problem soon surfaced. On the long voyage, Philip had kept his crew and the convicts healthy, but much of the transported grain and flour was ruined. Without flour or grain, the settlers would have no bread. In addition, many settlers began to show signs of scurvy. They needed some of Captain Cook's sauerkraut. In desperation, they resorted to eating plants that they found around them to survive. Philip carefully rationed the remaining flour while the settlers waited for the supply ship that was scheduled to arrive within the first year. Unknown to the colonists in Australia and authorities in England, the supply ship struck an iceberg during the voyage and sank. The colonists had to survive for 2 years before they received any news from England. By that time, the colony faced famine. Governor Philip had stationed an outpost at Botany Bay to look for ships that would arrive from England since the colonists had first planned to settle there. Finally, the news came that an English ship had been sighted, and the settlers were excited when they received this report. However, their excitement soon turned to disappointment when the ship was found to be another transport ship with over 200 convicts and few supplies. Providentially, a well-stocked supply ship soon arrived. The famine ended and the colony became firmly established. For several years, the colonists remained near the coast. The Great Dividing Range, with its steep rock face and giant gorges, effectively confined the colonists to living along the ocean. However, settlements continued to be established. Many convicts finished serving their prison terms and became profitable members of the colony. The crossing of the Great Dividing Range provided a great opportunity for expansion into the interior of Australia. In May of 1813, Gregory Blaxland and 2 companions started out from Blaxland's farm at the foothills of the mountains. After 3 weeks of exploration, these men looked down from a cliff edge and saw a stream running through the center of a valley. Further exploration revealed a passage to the Western Plains that enabled the exploration and colonization of the outback, which is a remote, dry region located in the center of the island. In 1836, explorers traveled southwest from Sydney around the coast and founded a new colony called South Australia. In 1852, sheep farmers in search of more pasture traveled south overland and discovered a river that they named the Murray. South of this river, they found the town of Melbourne and called the colony Victoria after Queen Victoria of England. All the Australian colonies were under the rule of England when gold was discovered in New South Wales, and a gold rush resulted in 1851. Around that time, the convict transports to the East Coast stopped. And with a rush of gold-hungry immigrants, the percentage of free citizens increased dramatically. About 400,000 people lived in the Australian colonies in 1850. Within 10 years, the population had increased to over 1 million. These new colonists wanted more freedom to govern themselves. In 1856, England responded by granting self-government to many of the colonies. However, England still protected the colonies and intervened in foreign affairs. In 1901, after intense discussions, Australia became the Commonwealth of Australia, made up of 6 states: Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia, and 2 federal territories. Instead of each colony governing independently, the Commonwealth formed a single federal capital. In 1927, the government buildings in the new capital of Canberra were ready for use. Canberra is similar to Washington, D.C. in the United States. It is the seat of government, but it is not part of any state. Despite the harsh conditions found in much of the outback, this region has an abundance of wildlife. All right, and that is the end. So tomorrow y'all are going to review for your test, and then you will take your test on Wednesday. Y'all have a good rest of your day, and I'll see y'all later.